Hi, I'm Kayla. Did you know that you need a 50-50 balance between literature and informational text to meet the Common Core State Standard? Our paired reading stories module lets you explore informational text in a hugely creative way by pairing fun, original stories with informational text related to that story. So students could be reading about anything from the rats of New York City in the 1800s to powdered wigs of the 1600s, giving you a great start for classroom discussions and critical thinking.
Each grade level has 3 reading levels within it. For example, 4th grade has these 3 reading levels. The reason why each grade is broken into 3 reading levels is that all the stories are leveled within each of the reading levels. So, the 4th grade reading levels are 4.0 to 4.3, 4.4 to 4.6, and 4.7 to 4.9. And each level contains 10 fictional stories and 20 informational articles. To get your students started in the Reading Stories module, you have 2 options. The automatic way is a great feature to find your student's reading level. However, if you want to set the grade level for your student, you can do that here. For example, if a student may be registered at grade 5, but you know he's only reading at grade 2, you can change the student's reading level to 2. Or you can choose to have the module discover the student's reading level. So how does Moby find a student's reading level? Students will begin the Reading Stories module at their registered grade level. For instance, this student is registered at 5th grade. So the student will begin with the first story at the 5.0 to 5.3 reading level, which is The Uninvited Guest. After reading the story, the student will answer comprehension questions that cover the different Common Core standards for 5th grade in reading for literature. Questions about things like knowing what the theme of a story is, understand the meaning of figurative language, and knowing how chapters of the story fit the overall plot. If the student scores 60% or higher in the first story of their registered grade, they will continue to move forward through that grade. But if the student scores below a 60% at the 5th grade, we will then try starting them at the 4th grade, with the first story at the 4.0 to 4.3 reading level. Assuming the student answers above 60% on the first story in 4th grade, we now know we've established his reading level and he will continue to finish 4th grade. Students then progress through the curriculum reading fictional stories and informational text. For instance, here, the student will start this section with a fictional story hidden and then 2 pieces of paired informational text. The reading comprehension questions in the Reading Stories module are aimed at getting students to think critically and foster some discussion in your classroom. Critical thinking allows students to take a deeper dive into the material and with a skeptical mind make conclusions about what they've just read. We'll take a look at some of the reading comprehension questions in the Reading Stories module that encourage this type of thinking. In this sequence, the student will read about the Nazi era. They will begin with a fictional story about a young boy who is being hidden from the Nazis. In this story, students will read how a young boy and his family helped hide several children from the Nazi soldiers. Then, the student will read 2 pieces of informational text. The first, an article about the life of Anne Frank, and the second, an informational article about the Nazis' use of propaganda to further their agenda. Now, the student has an understanding of the Nazi era from the perspective of 2 young people who were considered enemies of the Nazis, and some background on the Nazis' use of propaganda, including how the Nazis even rewrote some of the classic fairy tales. After reading the informational article, the student will answer some reading comprehension questions. And here is a good example of a question that gets the student to think critically. Why do you think Nazis used fairy tales to spread their propaganda? While the informational article mentioned the Nazi use of fairy tales, the student needs to think critically and deduce why they might have used them. And of course, the answer is to brainwash children. But watch what happens if the student gets the answer wrong. The answer feedback will help explain how to get to the correct answer. So how do you monitor your students' progress in the Reading Stories module? On the Progress tab, you can see the students' reading level and how they are progressing. The report shows which standards the student has mastered for that grade level by averaging their last 3 stories. For example, a student may have failed Standard 1 in the first 4 stories, but answered questions for Standard 1 correctly in the subsequent stories. In this case, the student will receive a check mark as soon as the questions for Standard 6.6 are answered correctly on 3 consecutive stories, and a gray dash appears for 2 reasons. First, the student has not answered any questions on that standard, or the standard is not applicable for literature or the current stories. If you click on an individual student's name from the Progress tab, you will see a bar graph showing the student's progress. The graph indicates the average of all questions the student completed in the standard. So, this means that the student may have all check marks because they more recently answered questions correctly, but will not show 100% on their graph. From the snapshot, you'll be able to see the last time the student worked in reading stories, current lesson, the time spent at home and at school, and their score on that last session. If you click on a student's name, you will see the Reading Stories dashboard that will give you a breakdown of student progress, including a chart that gives a great visual of the student's progress. Also, from the Library tab, you can see all of the fictional stories and informational text that your student will read. You can also print worksheets. If you click the lesson, then choose Print Worksheets, you can choose to print the story, problems, or the answer key. What is so fun about the informational text in the Reading Stories module is not only does it foster great discussions and critical thinking, but you will see your students will love learning about the world.